Welcome to class, everyone. Today's explainer is a definitive masterclass on fundamentally transforming how you learn. We're going to take those exhausting passive study habits you've probably relied on for years and replace them with highly active memory handling strategies. So think of me as your professor for the next few minutes, because my absolute goal today is to teach you how to completely master your own memory. Here's our syllabus for today. First up, we'll diagnose some common memory myths, and then we're going to explore your brain's actual mechanics. After that, we'll figure out how to dodge cognitive traps, execute 6 incredibly powerful strategies for mastery, and finally, unlock the true power of cognitive offloading. All right, let's dive right into our first topic and totally shatter a myth that holds almost every student back from their true potential. Look, most of us, students especially, think memory capacity is just this fixed, innate talent, right? Like you either have a photographic memory or you don't. But neuroscience actually tells us something entirely different. Struggling to remember isn't a capacity issue, it's an information handling issue. Even world-class memory champions are just using highly specific handling strategies. Basically, if you handle information poorly, you're going to forget it. Handle it correctly, and you'll remember. It really is that simple. So why do we mess this up so often? Well, it usually comes down to something called the illusion of fluency. This is basically when your brain confuses how easy it is to process information with actually learning it. And this brilliantly explains why highlighting completely tricks us. Dragging a bright neon color across a page feels incredibly smooth and easy. Because it feels visually organized, our brain falsely believes we're forming a durable memory, when in reality, we've just shut off our critical thinking to avoid feeling overwhelmed. Here's a wild fact for you. Research shows that staring at a blank wall for 10 minutes, literally doing nothing but wakeful rest, is actually more effective for your memory than highlighting. Crazy, right? That's because active learning takes real mental effort, not passive coloring. Passive studying feels super easy, but it yields zero retention. Active transforming, on the other hand, feels highly effortful because you are asking questions, comparing ideas, and building actual mental schemas. Honestly, if your studying feels a little too easy, you probably aren't actually learning. Which brings us to your brain's workbench, the exact place where all this learning actually happens, your working memory. According to the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve and modern neuroscience, your short-term or working memory is shockingly brief. We're talking 15 to 30 seconds max. If you read a complex paragraph and you don't actively handle that information within that tiny little window, it completely decays. Poof, it's gone. I want you to think of your working memory as a physical workbench. Any new data coming in is like a raw chunk of Play-Doh. If you just stare at that raw clay, it dries up and gets swept right into the forget pile in half a minute. You have to actively mold that information. Connect it to something you already know, form an analogy, build a shape out of it. And you have to do it immediately, before those 30 seconds run out. Okay, before we start molding that mental Play-Doh, we've got to talk about the cognitive traps that absolutely sabotage deep study sessions, especially for high-functioning students. When you get stuck on a difficult concept, your first instinct is probably to just think harder, but trying to force it actually makes your cognitive overload so much worse. Instead, elite students do what computer scientists call separating concerns. They isolate the problem into individual, bite-sized, solvable components. Also, when you feel totally overwhelmed by a massive syllabus, do not mistake that for a low memory capacity. It's actually a triage problem. You need to find your biggest constraint, that one single concept blocking your understanding of everything else, and focus solely on that. Another huge pitfall is the confidence interval trap. Basically, if you demand 100% perfection on complex, messy concepts, you are going to hit paralysis by analysis. If you refuse to move on to the next chapter until you flawlessly understand every tiny detail of the current one, you will get stuck forever. Real mastery actually acknowledges uncertainty. You need to widen your margin of error to confidently keep making progress. Just aim for functional accuracy so you can keep building out your knowledge base. So how do we fix all this? Let's get into the core tutorial with 6 practical, active strategies to totally optimize your working memory workbench. Strategy number 1 might sound a little counterintuitive, but as your professor today, I promise you it works. Increase the complexity. Instead of just passively reading words on a page, force the information into a new structure. Ask yourself, hey, how does this relate to what we covered last week? Create analogies. Simplify the dense terminology so a 5-year-old could understand it. By increasing the complexity of how you manipulate the data, you essentially lock it into your long-term memory. Moving on to strategy 2, handle the information immediately. Remember that tiny 15 to 30 second window we just talked about? Please do not make the amateur mistake of reading an entire chapter first and telling yourself you'll just go back and process it later. By the time you reach the bottom of the page, the top of the page has already vanished from your working memory. Mold the clay the very second it hits the workbench. Strategy 3 goes hand in hand with that. Pause for handling. To actually process things immediately, you have to stop the endless flood of new inputs. Read a paragraph, and then pause. Pause the recorded lecture. Give your working memory the breathing room and quiet it needs to actually mold the current concept. Otherwise, you'll exceed its weight limit and trigger cognitive overload. Strategy 4 is absolutely crucial. Avoid distracting noises. You see, your working memory has a strict physical weight limit. Ambient words, people chatting near you, or even lyrical music literally take up physical space on your mental workbench. They are stealing your processing power. Give your brain the silence it requires to do the heavy lifting. Strategy 5 is to practice retrieval, but specifically at the exact level of fluency you're going to need. A lot of students rely on basic flashcards, which might help you memorize a quick definition, but they often give you the entirely wrong cues for complex, real-world problem solving. If your exam is going to require you to synthesize arguments, running through single-word flashcards isn't gonna cut it. Practice pulling the information out of your brain exactly how you'll be expected to use it. And finally, strategy 6. This is literally the ultimate cheat code for the master student. Think on paper. This is exactly how we bypass the biological limits of our own brains. Let's actually dive really deep into this final strategy because understanding the power of cognitive offloading will completely transform how you tackle complex learning. So, what is cognitive offloading? Well, because your working memory has that strict weight limit we discussed, like it really struggles to hold more than a couple of complex things at once, offloading lets you bypass that limit by storing the raw data externally. Suddenly, your piece of paper becomes an actual extension of your brain's workbench. Here's the crucial takeaway. If you try to connect, say, 7 complex concepts entirely in your head, you're going to hit instant overload. Your brain gets frantic trying to remember the actual definitions while simultaneously trying to figure out how they connect. But by putting them on paper, you create this beautiful, clean, visual map of dependencies. You isolate your working memory so it only ever has to do one job at a time. So here is exactly how you do this in practice. Step 1, write all your complex concepts down on paper. Get them out of your head to totally clear that mental workbench. Now your brain is completely empty and relaxed. Step 2, bring only 2 of those concepts back into your working memory. And step 3, determine exactly how those 2 specific items connect, draw a line, and map it out visually. By doing this, your brain never has to hold more than 2 items at a time, making your learning incredibly fast, super precise, and entirely stress-free. This quote really hits the nail on the head for our entire explainer today. The issue is not that you have poor memory, but poor memory handling. Memory is not just some innate talent you're either born with or you're not. It is an active, structural habit. By offloading, triaging, and actively molding information within that critical 30-second window, you now have the exact blueprint to handle your memory like a top-tier student. So as we wrap up class and you sit down for your next study session, I want you to ask yourself a serious question. Are you just going to drag a highlighter across the page and trick your brain with the illusion of fluency? Or are you going to pull out a blank sheet of paper and actively transform the material? The choice and your ultimate mastery is entirely up to you.